You wake up tired. But not physically. You slept 8 hours. You ate and you rested. But something inside you feels heavy. Depleted. Like someone left a tap open somewhere deep in your soul and everything has been slowly draining out. And the strange part is, you can't point to one big traumatic event. Nothing catastrophic happened. Life looks fine from the outside. But you feel empty in a way you can't fully explain to anyone. And then you spend time with a certain person. You hang up the phone. You leave the room. You drive home from that dinner. And somehow you feel worse than before you saw them. Quieter. Smaller. Like something was taken from you that you didn't agree to give. You shake it off. You tell yourself you're being sensitive. You tell yourself they mean well. You tell yourself it's your problem, not theirs. But what if it's not your problem? What if what you're feeling is real, and what you're losing is something far more valuable than time or energy? What if what they're taking from you was never meant for them in the first place? Brother, what I'm about to share with you today is something most people spend decades learning too late. Because some of the most dangerous people in your life are not your enemies. They are the ones you call friends. The ones sitting at your table. The ones you grew up with. The ones who smile at you and yet somehow, every single time you leave them, you feel like a phone on 1% battery. And today we are going to talk about who they are, why they do it, what it costs you, and what God actually says about it. Let's start with something psychological because this is where most people miss it completely. In psychology there is a concept called energy vampires. Not literal vampires, but people whose patterns of behavior consistently leave those around them emotionally, mentally, and spiritually exhausted. Research in social psychology and interpersonal neuroscience shows that human beings are deeply wired for what scientists call emotional contagion. That means emotions are literally transferable. When you spend extended time with a person, your nervous system begins to sync with theirs. Your mood, your stress levels, even your brain chemistry starts to mirror the emotional state of the people closest to you. This is not mystical. This is biology. This is the way God designed human beings for deep community and connection. But what it also means is that the wrong connections don't just annoy you. They rewire you. They reshape your emotional baseline. They slowly shift who you are without you even noticing. And the most terrifying part is that it happens gradually. Not all at once. Like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it until you're already stranded on the side of the road wondering how you got here. Now let's talk about who these people actually are. Because they don't come with warning signs. They don't show up wearing a sign that says, "I will drain everything God put in you." They come as familiar faces. As people who need you. As people who have always been in your life. And that familiarity is exactly what makes them so dangerous. The first type is the chronic complainer. This person is never okay. Something is always wrong. Every conversation circles back to their problems, their pain, their frustrations. And when you offer solutions, they reject them. When you try to encourage them, it doesn't land. Because they are not actually looking for resolution. They are looking for a host. Someone to carry their weight indefinitely. Someone to pour into them with no intention of ever changing. And you keep showing up because you are compassionate. Because you care. Because you were taught that being a good person means being available to everyone who asks. But Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." The word companion in that verse doesn't mean occasional acquaintance. It means the people you consistently walk with, the people you give your time and energy to regularly. And suffering harm can be spiritual, emotional, and mental, not just physical. The second type is the dream killer. This one is subtle and particularly cruel because they often disguise criticism as love. They say things like, "I'm just being honest," or "I'm just looking out for you." But every time you share a vision, they find a reason it won't work. Every time you step toward something bigger, they remind you of every time you failed before. Every time you feel God stirring something in you, they bring logic and practicality to shut it down. They plant seeds of doubt dressed in concern. And over time you stop sharing your dreams. Not because the dreams died, but because you learned it wasn't safe to bring them into that relationship. You started to self-censor. You started to shrink. And slowly their voice began to sound like wisdom when it was actually just fear wearing a familiar face. The third type is the spiritually toxic person. And this one requires the most discernment because they often use the name of God while doing the work of the enemy. They gossip, but they call it sharing prayer requests. They manipulate, but they say God told them to speak into your life. They create guilt and obligation, and they use Scripture to justify control. They make you feel like walking away from them is walking away from God. But hear this clearly. God never uses people to control you. God never speaks through manipulation. God never needs guilt as a tool. If someone consistently leaves you feeling condemned, confused, and spiritually smaller after being around them, that is not the fruit of a godly connection. Galatians 5 verse 22 tells us the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If a relationship consistently produces the opposite of that fruit, you need to examine it seriously. The fourth type is the taker with no intention of reciprocating. This is the person who only calls when they need something. They need advice, they need money, they need a favor, they need emotional support. And you give it because you are generous, because you were raised to be there for people. But months pass and you realize this relationship only flows in one direction. And when you are struggling, when you need support, when you go through your own dark season, they are suddenly busy, suddenly unavailable, suddenly not picking up the phone. Relationships were never designed by God to be one-sided extractions. Even Jesus gave, but he also received. He let people serve him. He rested. He pulled away. He had an inner circle for a reason. Here is what this actually costs you, and I need you to feel the weight of this. Your energy is not infinite. Your peace is not a renewable resource that replenishes no matter how many times it gets taken. Every human being has been given a specific measure of emotional, spiritual, and creative capacity. And that capacity was given to you by God for a purpose. It was given for your calling, for your family, for your own spiritual growth, for the people God specifically placed in your life to pour into. When you let the wrong people drain that capacity, you are not being generous. You are being negligent with something God entrusted to you. Think about the parable of the talent. God expects a return on what he invested in you. And you cannot produce a return when everything is being siphoned out by people who were never assigned to your life in the first place. There is a reason Nehemiah, when building the wall, refused to come down and have conversations with people who were trying to distract and discourage him. He said something that should be written on the wall of every person with a calling. I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. That was not arrogance. That was stewardship. That was a man who understood that his assignment required his full energy, and he was not willing to waste it on the wrong conversations with the wrong people. And now I want to speak to the part of you that feels guilty even reading this, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, but isn't that selfish? Isn't a Christian supposed to love everyone? Aren't we called to be there for people? Yes. But there is a difference between loving someone and giving them unlimited access to your life. Jesus loved everyone. Jesus died for everyone. But Jesus did not give everyone the same level of access. He had the crowds, then the 70, then the 12, then the 3, Peter, James and John, who he took to the mountain of transfiguration. And then in the deepest moment of his humanity, in the garden, he separated himself even from the 3 and went further alone to pray. He understood something about proximity and purpose that we have almost completely lost. You can love someone and not give them your daily access. You can care about someone and still limit the influence they have over your life. You can pray for someone's healing and still recognize that the season of deep involvement has ended. Love does not require self-destruction. So how do you actually do this? Because cutting off or creating distance from people you have known for years, people who are family, people who are embedded in your life, that is one of the hardest things a person can do. And I am not going to give you a 3-step formula and pretend it is simple. It is not simple. It is painful. It requires courage. It requires discernment. And it requires you to value what God put in you more than you fear the discomfort of change. Start with prayer. Before you make any move, take this to God. Ask Him specifically to show you who in your life is assigned and who is a drain. Ask Him to give you discernment, because not every difficult person is supposed to be removed from your life. Some difficult people are there to refine you, to build your patience, to teach you something. God knows the difference even when you don't. So start there. Pray before you act. Then begin to observe honestly. Pay attention to how you feel after every interaction. Not in a paranoid way but in an honest way. Do you feel energized or depleted? Do you feel closer to God after spending time with this person or further away? Does this relationship produce the fruit of the Spirit in your life, or does it produce anxiety, confusion, guilt, and exhaustion? Your emotional response is data. Don't ignore it. Then, where possible, have the honest conversation. Not every relationship needs to end. Some need to be redefined. Some people drain you not out of malice but out of their own unhealed wounds. And sometimes a direct, loving, honest conversation can shift the dynamic entirely. Don't always choose the exit before you try the truth. Matthew 18 verse 15 says, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone." Honesty is always the first step. But when the relationship is genuinely toxic, when it has been confronted and nothing changes, when the pattern continues regardless of conversation, when the cost to your peace and your calling is too high, then you have permission to create distance. Not in anger, not with bitterness, not with a public announcement, but with quiet, intentional, prayerful boundaries. You can release someone from your inner circle without making them your enemy. You can step back without burning the bridge. You can love from a distance, and sometimes loving from a distance is the most spiritually mature thing you can do, for both of you. Because here is the truth that I want to leave you with. God has a purpose for your life that is specific and significant. He has things He wants to build through you, places He wants to send you, people He has actually assigned you to. And the enemy does not need to attack you directly to derail that purpose. All he needs to do is keep the wrong people close enough to slowly empty you out until you have nothing left to give in the direction of your calling. Guard your energy, not because you are selfish, but because you are steward. Guard your peace, not because you are heartless, but because your peace is a gift from God that He wants you to protect. Guard your circle, not because you are better than anyone, but because proximity shapes destiny and you cannot afford to let the wrong voices define your direction. You were not created to carry everyone. Jesus Himself said, "Come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He was speaking to you, not just from the burden of sin but from the burden of misplaced loyalty, of relationships that were never ordained, of connections you've been maintaining out of guilt rather than calling. It is not too late to protect what God put in you. It is not too late to be intentional about who gets access to your life. It is not too late to cut the leaks and start building with the people who were actually sent to build with you. Your calling is too important. Your energy is too sacred. Your future is too significant to be slowly drained by the wrong people. Protect it. Steward it. Honor God with it. If this message hits somewhere deep, write this in the comments. I will protect what God put in me. Let that be your declaration today. And if this is the kind of content that is building something real in you, subscribe, because here we don't just talk about faith. We build people who are ready to walk in their full purpose.